Welcome, everybody. This is actually our first event for the 2026 season of the Executive Roundtable. This is season number 5, I think. We've been at it for 5 years. Welcome, everybody. We're glad you could join us for today's event. I'm Kendall Justiniano. I'm the host of today's event, and I'm the managing director of Growth Arc Advisors. If you're new to the Roundtable, we're a network of executives from the materials industries who are focused on growth and how to achieve it. Our mission is to provide a forum to discuss issues and approaches vital to a thriving materials industry. We have events scheduled in the coming months. You can check the schedule and see past events as well at growth-arc.com/roundtable. If you'd like a reminder for coming events sent to you, then register for Roundtable membership if you're not already registered. Without further ado, if you have your mic set to speaker mode, you should see today's guest, Ron Malachuk, and myself on your screens. Ron is a partner at JM Search and a member of the firm's chemical and process industry practice. Over his career as an executive search and talent consultant, Ron has conducted C-suite and senior advisor searches and leadership projects across multiple sectors, and that includes agribusiness, chemicals, engineering and construction, packaging, and plastics. His clients include global industrial conglomerates, the Fortune 500, middle market manufacturing organizations, and portfolio companies of leverage buyout and venture capital firms. He has also authored several white papers on the emerging technology and digital trends disrupting the process industries. Prior to executive search, Ron was in the trenches, and his experience includes M&A, integration, corporate strategic planning, and project management with companies like Wells Fargo, General Motors, and Exelon. Ron earned his BS in chemical engineering and an MS in environmental management from IIT, and he has an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. I wanted to have a conversation with Ron today. We were talking a month or two ago, and that's really because of the structural shifts that are occurring in the industry today. And I say structural shifts because one of our viewpoints is that this shift in the industry is in some ways permanent. There's no going back to the easy growth days of the last 2 decades in China growth. And as a result, it leads you to the question of what kind of leadership is required to get through these tough times right now and to prosper in the future. And I think Ron is uniquely positioned to discuss those trends. So welcome, Ron Malachuk.
Thank you, Kendall. Great to be here.
So let's start off. I guess first of all, can you give us a sense of your personal story?
Yeah.
What's your career arc, and how did you end up sourcing industrial leadership for the industry?
Well, like many, more serendipitous than anything else. You don't graduate with a bachelor's in chemical engineering and think you're going to find your way into executive recruiting, but here I am. So, as you mentioned, a bachelor's in chemical engineering, and started my career in the locomotive business of General Motors, which was a fascinating time. It was just as the EPA began to regulate heavy duty diesel. And in
Yeah.
some small way, it was the introduction of business strategy combined with human capital strategy. And how do you
Hmm.
combine those Venn diagrams? And through there, as you mentioned, Masters of Science in Environmental Management, and then Chicago Booth MBA. And I was ultimately recruited by a recruiting firm in 2008, and particularly focused and still focused on the industrial markets. And I've been with JM Search now for about 6 years. We are a leading top 10 executive search and board recruiter, and we are one of, if not the fastest growing search firm over the last several years.
That's fantastic. So you saw some of the intersection between capital and human within the corporation, and then decided to make that a longer pursuit for yourself. I'm wondering,
Yes.
you've spent 20 years doing this. What have been some of the key insights, or what are some of the key themes that you've arrived at over that time?
Yeah, it's a great question and probably don't have enough time to get as deep into all of them as would like. But in no particular order, I would say one of the first is the continued driving of innovation and R&D to create this B2B to C ecosystem. And I continue to see with our clients and with the firms we help recruit this deepening investment in customer relationships. And outside of that, most of the folks here, I would imagine, see much the same as it relates to smart manufacturing, particularly with aging assets in the chemicals materials industry and what the next generation will look like, particularly with AI and agentic agents and a host of other predictive tools and analytics. Certainly, sustainable and circular manufacturing is continuing to drive the dialogue. As most of us have seen and are experiencing supply chain resilience in the light of volatility. And lastly, the continued investments in the chemicals, materials, and really just the broader sector itself by private equity.
Okay. And we'll get into some of that private equity detail as well. Um, I'm glad to see you've got such an optimistic outlook because it's tough times right now. As it regards some of these trends that the industry is grappling with right now, what are some of the things that you see the industry still struggling with, especially during this tough period?
If we turn on the leadership lens of what the industry is dealing with or needs to see more of, much of it are still the same competencies, traits, and drivers that the top decile leaders have. And again, you're talking about bias for action. You're talking about forward thinking, and particularly here as products go from specialty to commoditization, as products that were at one point novel and were emerging now become a bit more mature and aging. And with that, we continue to see this intersection and the importance of linking talents to value creation. And value creation doesn't necessarily just mean revenue drivers or folks that can drive down operating costs. Certainly, we would consider those the drivers, but then we also are seeing more and more of the enablers, and especially these support functions around data analytics, AI, and how do we embed some of these new economy tools in what is a very legacy old economy ecosystem. And the last thing I would say there is, and I'm sure many have heard this phrase or have encountered it, it's learning agility. It's that intellectual curiosity where the models and the frameworks that we've used for decades to solve problems, many of those frameworks are either obsolete or they're far less relevant in what we see today and what we expect to see in the future.
It's interesting. So you've got this theme of, hey, there's a life cycle pattern happening in the chemical industry right now, but there are also these entering trends that require us to change to shift. It's not as though leadership is staying static or leadership is sort of calcifying. It's actually more dynamic than that.
It is far more dynamic than that, and especially as organizations, and it's irrespective if they're publicly traded, private equity backed, family owned, somewhere in between. It is creating an environment where your high potential, your high performers are continually being challenged. They are giving opportunities to grow and expand. And with that, you are building a future set of capabilities and competencies. And as you noted, my crystal ball is no clearer than anyone here on the screen. So if we continue to drive that problem solving, that creative thinking, and the ability to look at very complex and in some ways incomplete information-based problems, those toolkits, those skill sets will continue to be in high demand and they will be deployed across enterprises.
Interesting. Okay. So I'm going to take a little darker turn, if you will, because I know everybody in the workforce sees this right now. When you're going into a trough in the chemical industry, the way the playbook runs, you've got to conserve cash.
Yeah.
Um, and so I know we see reduction in workforce, we see cost-cutting measures just in the present term right now. We also see sort of the looming potential threat of AI. You've talked about some of the needs as a result of that, but people are also wondering how their jobs are going to be affected. And I see it going all the way into the executive leadership ranks. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the essential impact you've seen about us entering this trough phase and what that has meant as you see for the market for executive leadership?
Yeah, it's a great point, and part of it is if we ring fence the COVID time frame of 20 into 21, the chemicals industry from a total shareholder return was an incredible investment class from 2010 and that ring fence to right around 22, 23. And then as you noted, we began to see and continue to see the overcapacity in the market. We continue to see end market weakness and demand drops, particularly in categories and sectors that for a long time were drivers of growth and volume. So what that means and what we are seeing is one, it is the optimization of the current portfolio.
Mhm.
And ideally, it's not just looking at it from a core versus non-core asset. It's really around, are we in the markets? Are we in the products that the industry or the respective firm views as growing at or above GDP and having
Mhm.
the foundational elements to continue to warrant the investment because that return on invested capital will be there. The other piece that we've seen, which goes in alignment with consumer spending dropping, is yet with everybody here, I would imagine, now very comfortable with a few pushes of a device, something arrives at your door sometimes in less than 12 hours.
Mhm.
And so even though consumer spending is dropping, we are seeing, and our customers share with us, that their end users or their customers continue to expect these value added services, these value added experiences. And so it continues to lead with this, how are you as a business interacting with your customers? How are you as a chemicals materials firm earning the right to innovate and to partner alongside your customers? And the deeper you're able to get there, where now your customers are sharing much more of their end user data, you become a lot stickier and your economic moat gets much wider.
Interesting. Is this something that is broader than materials, right? I know for materials, there's a big link to global markets and Asia demand drop off that we feel that, right? Because we're a global market. You've got a US perspective as well, and you doing more than just process in materials. What do you see? Is it a broader slowdown, or is it really kept to chemicals?
No, it's been a broader slowdown from a discrete manufacturing perspective, as well as from where we sit and what we're talking about here from a process manufacturing perspective. Now, of course, if your business, if your composites and materials are tied into aerospace and defense, as you noted, that has been one of the subsectors that has shown growth. If you are tied to semiconductors, if you're tied to data centers, that has been an area that has also shown growth. But I would say from a global perspective, still seeing the supply chain resilience or the supply chain focus on how do we minimize risk while maximizing response. We
Okay.
continue to see not just with AI, but is how do we get more predictive modeling, predictive maintenance within the operational and manufacturing excellence of these industrial companies. And then lastly, something where we spend a good portion of our time is in and around labor transformation. And there's a number of data points that we can talk about, but I would say directionally, it's it's well observed that the broader industrial ecosystem is going to see a significant wave of retirements and a significant wave of opt-outs over the next 4, 5, 6 years. And as companies, especially in these fast changing times, how is that intellectual capital? How is that tribal knowledge shared from the executives that have been doing this 35, 40 years? And how is all of that going to be passed in a structured, systematic way so the organization doesn't watch decades and decades of that top talent walk out the door?
Interesting. So I hear global slowdown generally. I hear, but with some bright spots. But the thing that's interesting is this sort of reconfiguration theme that you've got, both from a regionalization, so how supply chains have to shift, but the one that's even more interesting is this talent piece, right? Reconfiguring the talent. I know you and I were talking. It's been a long time since the industry saw a downturn, and we were sort of bemoaning the fact that there aren't a lot of leaders who lived through, the really cyclical times of the chemicals business, and that's shown in a little bit in the way that we've responded. How much of that do you think is a short-term shift versus a long-term permanent structural shift?
Yeah, great question. Our view is it is a structural, not a cyclical shift. And we see this through a number of dimensions, but one of the most to us with where we sit on the human capital side, one of the most tangible is when organizations recruit an outsized percentage of their ELT externally,
Hmm.
that is a signal that the business is going through some level of transformation, change, restructuring, whatever it might be. Where simply put, we need to bring in either tools and skills that we don't have or we don't have enough of, or we want to bring in executives that have lived through this shift and they're able to not only guide the technical, but they're able to rally the organization. And as you noted, many organizations that may not have lived through this type of valley.
Yeah.
Conversely, when we see the internal promotions or we see the internal succession planning, that typically is a signal to us that this company in this industry or the part of the value chain it serves, that it sees the market operating in a similar way, or it doesn't anticipate any immaterial shocks to its business model and how it
Yeah.
goes to market. Um, Conversely, when we're now talking about the AI evolution and this continued fit for purpose, what we've also seen from a global energy and feedstock advantage, clearly those changes are not going to be cyclical in nature. They may not stay how they are today, but I would say structurally and directionally, they're probably going to follow a similar path.
Gotcha. So you've painted for us a couple of different vectors, right? So you've got global slowdown. Obviously, that's probably going to bring leadership into the labor pool. You've also said, okay, some of this will be retired, but that leaves this organizational gap. But then you also highlighted, oh, well, if you see a lot of external hiring, you're talking about companies who are potentially going through transformations, consciously going through transformations. Net that out for me. What does it look like in the supply demand balance for leadership from your perspective?
The market still remains a candidate driven market, or said differently, the demand for those high skilled, high touch, results oriented leaders, the demand far outstrips the supply. And particularly as we talk about, and transformation means many things to many different organizations, but for what we see in the industrial sector, it's this continued, this omni-channel go-to-market approach. It is highly customer centric. And it is this intersection of we're looking for either technology, R&D, innovation leaders, for one example, but yet they
Mhm.
also have that business acumen and that learning agility. Because the balance that that group is wrestling with is the question of now versus next. And it isn't a question that has a one size fits all answer. It does get into specifically where that company plays, what it has in its stage gate pipeline. And we've started to see, particularly with M&A having been such a large driver of growth,
Mhm.
even in publics and strategics, we're starting to see now not necessarily a pullback in M&A. Our view is 2026 is actually going to be a fairly robust year for M&A, but it's going to be M&A that is very targeted. And that target
Okay.
is whether it's subsector consolidation, whether it's organizations wanting to get access to technologies, to molecules, to markets where it doesn't have a presence but wants to have a presence, or with the continued change in markets and regulatory environments, this helps to diversify the portfolio or gives it a presence in regions that have already gone through some of those shifts.
That's interesting. For the time that we're in, that's a very sort of optimistic demand picture, right? For a certain type of leader, I think is where you're headed with that, right? It sounds to me like an industry that's realized it's got to do some retooling, and leaders who are able to do that can thrive in this kind of time frame.
Yeah, we fully agree, and there's a lot to unpack with that question you just asked. The most difficult pivot that an executive will undergo, in my view, in one's career is when that executive goes from being an individual contributor, a domain expert, and
Hmm.
now is getting results and achieving results through people and teams. And it sounds very straightforward. And as I joke, if it was, I'd have to change professions. So it isn't quite as straightforward as we make it out to be. But what it also creates, and what we're seeing with organizations, is putting forward these robust career roadmaps, or putting together these skills-based roadmaps where you're finding out through experience, through assessments and other psychometric tools and testing, who are the top 10, the top 50, the top 100 based on the size of your business. And with that top 100, you are pushing and challenging that group. And what that means is you are putting that group into different functions, you're putting that group into different geographies, you're putting that group into different businesses. And what you're trying to develop as quickly yet as methodically as possible is you're trying to develop enterprise-wide thinkers, enterprise-wide problem solvers, where if you're a VP GM, or you're the director of a product category or a product base, you're thinking in terms of quarters, and as you should. But when you move to the enterprise wide, you move to the ELT, now you're thinking in terms of years. And that enterprise-wide shift and finding and developing a group that has that capability, those are the companies, in our view, that continue to link their talents to the value creation. It also has the flywheel effect where now reputationally, your organization is viewed as a talent magnet and a talent developer. And in any environment that matters, in this continued environment, it matters even more.
That's interesting. So you've painted a pivot there, and I'm going to read between the lines a little bit because, I think of leader who's proven themselves to lead groups and teams, sort of that's the director, junior, executive kind of level, right? Maybe business
That's right.
unit, functional VP or something like that, moving and shifting to an enterprise level
Mhm.
executive. What in today's environment, what do you think that those senior leaders need from their talent today? And a related question, how many of those senior leaders really recognize all of the things that they need from their talent?
Well, directionally, I think most at least have an understanding that
Mhm.
the tools and the problem solving competencies and capabilities are in shorter supply than their organizations would like. What we also advise in the conversations we have with boards and with senior leaders is that whether it is a director, whether it's a VP or other, that as a leader or as a functional leader, you fully understand what are the targets, what are the ambitions of the business, and how does the work and how do the skills and competencies I bring to the table either drive the growth, the revenue, the OpEx, or how do I enable if I'm in finance or if I'm in supply chain IT, how do I enable those businesses and those geographies to be as profitable and to be as lean and efficient as they need? I would also say, and you've touched on this a few times, Kendall, we're also in this structural change environment where uh, we're still trying to figure out what does AI and machine learning and LLM mean for the chemicals material space, whether it is more predictive maintenance, whether we're able to commercialize from molecules to products faster and more cost effectively. And some organizations are a little further down that track than others. They all recognize at some point they're going to get there, but it's more around how do we embed this? Who owns the data? And who's responsible for converting that data into decision-based information?
Okay. So part of that I heard was as an executive understanding very clearly sort of where your levers are to the business
Yep,
or enterprise level performance.
that's right.
Um, and then this other piece of helping the company sort out sort of some of these transformational effects is another critical place of contribution. I asked the question about awareness, and you said most senior executives have at least an awareness of the idea, because I think at any time you have a transformational shift, anytime an industry is
Mhm.
sort of retooling or you're introducing a technology like AI, I've seen the phenomena where senior leaders will bring somebody in as an executive to be a change leader, and then the organization struggles with the change that that leader is trying to bring, or maybe even the hiring executives struggle with the change that the leader is trying to bring. How do
Mhm.
you see that kind of dynamic occurring at a time like this?
Yeah, it's part of it. Part of it is the organization's understanding and the willingness that it needs to change, or simply put, what got us here as a company is not going to get us there wherever there might be in the future. And where we see the executives that are brought in from the outside. Yes, we are full believers and in EQ, emotional intelligence, the ability
Mhm.
to influence, particularly in these global, functionally driven matrices where you're oftentimes working with colleagues that either don't know you well, may not solid line report to you, but yet your ability to get things done is quite dependent on that group supporting and providing what you need.
Mhm.
But all that being said, the executives that either get promoted internally or the executives that are recruited externally, it is still the proven ability to execute, to operate, and to deliver results. And I had a very senior executive share with me. I asked him almost verbatim the question that you did.
Mhm.
And he said, my experience is when you come in from the outside and you are visible, you are present, and you let the teams know, you let the factories, you let the plants know, everybody's going to have a voice. Not everybody's going to have a vote. But my commitment to you is I will hear, I will listen, I will process. Doesn't necessarily mean some or any of what we've shared will get instituted, but understand that I will take that under advisement, and that will be part of the data points that we put into our framework for moving forward. And what that leads to, and I'm sure most on the screen here have experienced, is you have this bell curve of transformation, and you have that 15% that may have arrived at that point even earlier than the executive from the outside or who was recently promoted. So that 15%, those will be your champions. They are fully on board. That will be the
Mhm.
group carrying the message. You have the other 15% of the bell curve where, try as you might, they're just going to be resistant to change. They will be blockers. That will be the group that will maybe not openly oppose, but they will be the group that will try to whisper that, oh, we've been there, done that. Just give it a year, 18 months. The executive will lose energy and focus, and we'll go right back to the status quo. And then in that 70%, the real sweet part of the bell curve, that's the trust but verify. And
Yep.
so we hear all the time, well, let's get some early wins. But part of what we dive into is, well, early wins for who? And so is it early wins for a product? Is it early wins for a geography? Is it early wins for one of the business units? And the more consistent and the more frequent the messaging, the more that you turn those words into actions. And once you do that, it's like most things. People want to be on a winning team. They want to be on a team that is growing and expanding. And another longtime CEO client of mine said when I asked him, why do you spend so much time on the factory floor? And he goes, because you will get what you are willing to ignore. And if the folks on the floor see safety, quality, waste, scrap, you can have the best PowerPoint, you can give the best town hall talk. When the folks on the ground see what's actually happening, your credibility has been it's been lost,
Yeah.
or at least
So
minimized.
I heard a couple of things there. I heard in the conversation you had with the first senior executive, there's an openness and there's a willingness to try to understand what it's going to take from the expertise that you're bringing in from the outside market.
Yeah.
At the same time, there's a responsibility to the executive who's been hired in to be the change agent, to be an effective thought partner, an effective
Mm-hmm.
advocate for change. I know as we coach junior executives, and one of the places we sit and focus on the most is their influencing skills, right? Especially the influence up. How do you, as a junior executive, become a thought partner to a CEO?
Hmm.
And that's not intuitive. And it's something that you talked about the enterprise level kinds of skills. That's something that's required of these kind of leaders, it seems, that are going to need to be brought in to affect some of the change that's going on in the industry.
Absolutely. And part of that is that responsibility sits with the in your example, that sits with the junior executive.
Mhm.
Are you seeking out formal and informal mentors? Are you raising your hand to, in for an instance, get away from corporate and go into a new geography, go into a troubled business, go into a product category that might differ significantly from its technology, its molecules, how it's manufactured, how it goes to market, where in essence I can't use the playbook that I've developed over the last 5 years because it's simply not an apples to apples comparison.
Yep.
And when you take those opportunities, you take that with the understanding, if I'm a junior executive, if I walk into the manufacturing or plant floor and I try to impress upon somebody who has forgotten more about this product than I know, how I think it should be improved, as you might imagine, there's a high degree of tissue rejection
Mhm.
versus, and this is what we really like to see, even with candidates' resumes and candidates' backgrounds, we like to see somebody who had an expat assignment thousands of miles away from corporate, where there might be a very significant time zone difference, and you simply can't wait for your boss or your mentorship or your team to help get you to the answer. You have to be boots on the ground, developing those relationships. And part of that is asking really good questions,
Mhm.
listening and understanding the answer, and then formulating that into how is that going to drive my decision making. It really
I love
gets
it.
to what what we hear, and with the top decile CEOs that we've placed, that we know, that we measure, first and foremost, above all of the skills from EQ, IQ, calculated risk taking, bias for action, results orientation, it's followership. Do people want
Mhm.
to be a part of your team? Do
Yeah.
people believe in the strategic vision, and do they believe in the outline that you've articulated for the future state of the business? And oftentimes what you'll see, and there's many examples of this, is CEO or ELT member goes from company A to company B. And much to our chagrin, because of course we would love to be recruiting this new executives team, they recruit 60, 70% of their former colleagues, short of any non competes, non solicits, and
Mhm.
they bring that team, or said differently, that team wants to go where their leader is. When we see consistent trends and themes of that nature, it is a blasting green heat map signal that this executive builds followership and knows how to lead.
Step into your leadership is some of what I'm hearing, right? You've
Step
got
in,
to be
step
somebody
into
who
your
steps into your
leadership.
leadership.
And
Let's
we've all heard this and seen this, but it ultimately gets down to authenticity.
yeah, I love it. Let's take a question or two from the audience.
So it's a really pertinent question, and one of the one of the easiest ways, if you will, is if there have been senior leaders that you were close to or knew in your organization that have left, whether they were recruited by an executive search firm, whether they were recruited by an internal talent executive within that company, and just ask, what was the process like? If that executive was recruited by an executive search firm, what did you think of the experience? What did you think of the recruiter? And then this is really important. Would you mind making an introduction to that recruiter? And I will share with you I'm very fortunate where I receive uh, a material amount of inbound requests each and every day. And while I would like to respond to each and every one in a timely manner, I just don't have enough hours in the day. However, when a senior executive that has either been a client or has been a trusted market resource, when that executive reaches out to me and says, Ron, Kendall is one of the best commercial leaders I've ever had, it would be well worth your time to get to know him and spend a couple minutes together. I can assure you that call is going to get scheduled within 24 to 48 hours. The second piece is attending various conferences, attending industry events, particularly if some of the companies, some of the attendees might be indirectly connected to the products, the business, the markets that you serve. And it just provides a deeper lens or provides a deeper aperture from which you to draw and just get different viewpoints.
Thank
Does
you.
that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. Thanks, Ron.
Okay.
I think that the tip to sort of leverage introductions, ask people you know for an introduction, applies to both recruiters as well as extending your executive network. I think that's great advice. The other one that I'll mention as well is if in that conversation with your new executive, you can figure out how to be a thought partner within 40 minutes. Just bringing your expertise to their problem within the 40-minute span of a conversation, it will come off much more impactfully than can I understand your business or can you tell me a little bit about what's that ability to develop that thought partnership relationship
Mhm.
leaves a very memorable conversation with executives. Ron, is that do you find that's the case?
We do, and we hear this a lot where uh, board, CEO, ELT, they're looking for an executive, particularly if you are recruiting for a smaller or mid-market capitalization company, where those firms they love and really respect the foundational training that an executive gets at one of the well-known global Fortune 100 organizations. You know what great people, processes, and systems look like. That being said, how is that executive going to pivot into a much smaller entrepreneurial environment where you won't have the resources, you won't have all of the functions that you can just make a couple of calls and your supply chain expert comes in or your IT expert comes in. In some ways, that's why you're being hired. The other
Yeah.
piece is, and this goes back to the followership, if you are leading a team in the Fortune 500, let's say, your direct reports are going to be fairly robust. 6, 8, 10, 12. There's going to be some number. When you are leading or when you are part of a 50, $100 million business, you may only have 2 to 4 key direct reports. That better be the 2 or 4 that you trust explicitly and implicitly with what you're trying to drive, because those direct reports, that will be your flywheel while you're out trying to shape the culture, shape the growth strategy, and really carry that message to external and internal stakeholders. Yeah, it's a great question. Not to be glib, but the phrase is hire slow and fire fast. And there's more to that. It's not as clear, but it is when the executive comes in and you're meeting as a group and then one-on-one with either your direct and your indirect team. And as you're having those conversations, you are being an incredibly aggressive listener. And if you ask the right question or you ask the right question the proper way, eventually you're going to get to that person's North Star, or you'll get to that person's core belief. And through that, you will hear whether or not that person is going to be an agent for change or that person's going to be a blocker. It also gets to where we may have the right culture fits. We may have somebody that is additive and accretive to the organization, but they're in the wrong role. And the faster you can figure that out, especially if it's somebody that is fully supportive of the business, they may have never worked anywhere else. So this isn't just a logo, this isn't just a business card. This is where they met their spouse, or this is where they were married, or this is where their children are born. So it becomes ingrained in who they are. And if you look not at roles, or you don't just look at the org chart, but you're really looking at a skills-based matrix, that this might be somebody that brings a lot of what we need. They're just the right person in the wrong role. That though, you better be certain that you have the right person just in the wrong role, because that top 15%, rest assured, they know who the blockers are. And that's the 15% that is watching intently as to what's going to be done. And if that 15% doesn't see the change that they expect, and a good portion of them will be very direct, they may not be disparaging, but they'll tell you what's on their mind. And if those changes, or at least the foundation of those changes, don't start, that top 15% becomes your flight risk.
Yeah,
You're
very
essentially
good.
showing people
Thank you.
what you'll tolerate, and that sends a very big message to the audience that you need as part of your change initiative. What I love about that, Ron, is you're headed the same place most of the science says, right? Which is the blockers. You eventually are going to have to cut them loose. But you're
And
also
and and and
emphasizing.
and, and
You're
exactly to
also
that point,
yeah.
that top 15%, especially those that are driving revenue, driving growth, leaning out an organization and improving quality, safety, environmental, and health, that 15%, they know their market value, because they get told
Mhm.
by people like me, they get told by their mentors, they get told by their peers in other companies. They know their market value.
Yeah. What I love about the other half of that advice is get really good at asking questions that are highly discerning to get at people's motivation,
That's
right? This is not something you do as a knee-jerk response to somebody who pissed you off. This is you spending quickly some time to be very discerning, but once you've made those decisions, you need to act on them. I love that.
well summarized. I had
Yeah.
a very senior HR leader who was a client, is a client, and shared with me, that's the approach that their group takes. Is It's similar to what we've heard in negotiations. Focus on interests, not positions.
Before I get back to a question for Ron, I did want to make a mention. We've just locked in our next roundtable. It's going to be in May, and we're going to be talking AI into materials R&D, which is going to be a fascinating conversation. We have the CEO of Citrine Informatics who's going to come in and talk to us. So Greg Mulholland will be here to talk about a topic that's on everybody's mind, which is AI. So Ron, I want to step back a little bit.
Hmm.
We coach executives. I've spoken with a lot of junior executives, even senior executives sometimes, who have maybe gotten that role within the same company that they've worked their way up for a long time, and therefore haven't
Mm.
actually executed an executive search, and now may be in a position where they're executing an executive search. One of the things we find is people bring a lot of I won't say outdated, but a lot of ideas about what search is about, especially
Mm.
executive search, from their individual contributor time when they may have done a search. And so I wanted to get a sense from you, what makes executive search different, say, from a director level search? And what advice would you have for folks who are executing an executive search?
Yeah, really good question. So at its core, JM Search and most of the uh, the top firms, we are a fully retained executive search firm, meaning we are retained by our clients. And so that's a little bit different than what you might see at some of the lower levels where it's contingency, meaning the recruiter's payment is contingent upon placing an executive, placing an individual contributor. So if you're asking the question from the the executive side, I now have to recruit my first executive as part of my team, and I'm thinking about a search firm. First and foremost would be if you have a prior relationship with a search firm, if you've developed that partnership with a search consultant, that would be the most obvious call for a number of reasons. One, and this is the most important, that executive is going to know you. That recruiter is going to know your style. It's going to know your culture. I think, as Dave said, how you like to work, how you like to get things done, where are you at your best? And that recruiter is going to have that lens when he or she is out there assessing candidates in the market. If you are an executive that gets contacted by an executive search firm, part of your due diligence is, yes, researching the company, the industry. Why is the role open? What is the mandate for the role? And really getting a sense of why is this role going to market versus having an internal successor? And then as you think about where you see yourself, does the company have a track record for promoting or developing or expanding your skill set, your toolkit? And that's fairly straightforward to see if it's in the public domain. If not, you ask those questions and many, many more of the executive recruiter. And recruiters may have that answer. If not, they will put you in touch with the member of the hiring committee who does.
Okay. So that's for somebody who's seeking leadership or somebody who's been approached by an executive
Yeah.
recruiter about the inquiry for a potential opportunity. If I was a candidate who was looking for a job, how would I then think about retained recruiters? I often
Mhm.
get executives who lean heavily on reaching out to retained recruiters and then waiting for them to bring a job, right? As a way to see what's available out there. How would you think about that, and what advice would you give to somebody who's going to mount a search, if you will? What place should a retained recruiter relationship play in that, and what other advice would you give to them about mounting that search?
Yeah, good follow-up. Partly that relationship, it really becomes an information share where the executive is sharing with the recruiter what he or she is seeing in the market, what are some of the developments that may directly impact their respective business, their respective geography. Conversely, the recruiter will be able to share what we are seeing in terms of the skills, the experiences, the traits that our clients and prospective clients are starting to prioritize. Now, from a networking perspective, um, going back to what I shared earlier, if you have a mentor, if you have former colleagues that have gone through an executive search, what types of questions did the recruiter ask? Where did the recruiter dive in a little bit deeper? When you were sitting in front of the hiring committee, you were sitting in front of your potential peers in the organization. Where did they drive the conversations? What questions did they ask? What was really top of mind for them? Now, this may not be true for everybody here, but I'll take it more from a directional perspective. If you have any interaction with investment bankers, with private equity firms, with private capital firms, with any type of either institutional shareholder or a firm or a group that serves and works with those institutional shareholders, leverage those relationships early and often because the investment bankers on the sell side, the investment bankers on the buy side, they have probably even an earlier and deeper lens that we do because they're working with companies that are looking to sell, they're working with firms and funds that are looking to buy. And so you're going to get a clear sense of capital is moving towards aerospace and defense. Capital is moving towards semiconductor. Capital is moving towards materials, bio-based composites, whatever it might be. And so with that, you're now able to tailor your own marketing message and background to the skills and the competencies that are in demand.
Gotcha. Gotcha. When you see executives approach you and they're aspiring to a stretch role for their next assignment and they're mounting a search, what are the mistakes that you often see and what advice would you give to an executive who is ambitious in a good way and looking to really jump to the next level, if you will, with their search?
So the most common question, as you might expect, is I want to be a CEO or I want to be a CFO. How do I get there as a VP of finance or as an SVP GM? And part of that is the skills and the experiences we talked about, which you have multi-products, multi-geography, multifunctional responsibility. On top of that, it's also and we see this, and it really is private equity, public company, private capital. There is a shortage of qualified and capable CEOs. So many boards, many sponsors are open and maybe even getting more comfortable with a first-time CEO. However, it must be a CEO that knows that product category and knows that ecosystem incredibly well. So when that person steps in, there is a credibility and there is a market understanding as to why this person was brought in. Now, conversely, if you're looking to get to the C-suite, part of that is developing formal, informal relationships, taking project work, or just volunteering to be a mentor or to work with the next generation of STEM graduates. So what you're also showing is your ability to retain or your ability to recruit. And with all the change and transformation that we've talked about here with AI and other tools, it's also your own ability to get upskilled and then your ability to help others get reskilled. And with that, you are now creating this leadership archetype, and you're creating this environment where your head of HR, the company's head of HR, will say, if an opportunity ever opened up on Kendall's team, I'd love to be considered. And the very strategic HR leaders will likely know the answer or at least directionally, but will say, well, tell me why. And what that becomes is I want to be a part of this team because as I know I want to develop my tool belt, working with Kendall and working with Kendall's team, it's going to add tools that I don't have today.
Got it. Would you say that advice, you kind of spoke to the context of somebody who wants to get to this CEO level, essentially saying, yes, people are open to that, but there are things that have to sort of line up. Would you say that's true even up and down the chain? If I'm a functional VP at a divisional level and I want to make business president or I want to make corporate functional VP, senior VP, do I think about that the same way?
You you do. The biggest difference is if you're not an external candidate, if you're a director looking to get to VP or VP to SVP, if it's staying within your own business, what are and how deep are the relationships that you've built with executives or with people outside of your direct span of control?
Yeah.
And part of that is are you getting out to the different geographies once a quarter? I know with even the tool we're using today, it is so efficient to jump on a screen, and that's great. But I think we all agree and understand the relationships and the quality of those relationships that you get being in person or walking the floor with someone, going to dinner with someone. That is your opportunity to leave an impact. And so we encourage executives to find opportunities, whether they be within the company, whether they be your organization might sponsor a conference, or your organization might be one of the leading attendees of a conference. If you're not on that invite list, go. If there's an opportunity to speak or present, raise your hand.
Okay, good. It's helpful. I know we've got several folks in the audience that are just got done with a search or mounting a search and sort of in play in this kind of time frame. I wanna wrap with sort of one question, and I'll ask you to see if you can draw a lot of what we've spoken about together. What do you think is, if I now think about the leader of the future in materials?
Mm.
So there's the leader that's now necessary to get through this tough time, but if you say, okay, where do you think sort of are there shifts in what we think of as the leader of the future, 5 years out, 10 years out, that you've seen already the trends
Mhm.
toward? What would some of those key characteristics be, shifting from A to B, if you will?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this, and I would offer many of the skills and experiences today will still be relevant going from A to B. What we expect to see is that change and that transformation is going to happen even faster. Or said differently, as consumer and customer trends and tastes
Mhm.
are changing and products are becoming more obsolete or are becoming more commoditized faster than ever, it's going to continue to highlight the executives that may not have specific molecule experience or specific technology experience, but what they bring is that holistic problem, creative thinking, and the ability to look at where we are. Where do we see the market going? What type of contingencies or what type of cases are we building where if this then that, and recognizing we'll have some known unknowns, we'll also have some unknown unknowns, but how do we mitigate that risk while still ensuring that our clients and our customers today are getting that high touch and high margin focus, but
Mhm.
yet we're also understanding that as the world shifts, we have to be able to shift with it. And to me, that's focused more on the skills, the thinking, the problem solving than somebody who, for instance, has spent 35 years in case and they know that ecosystem incredibly well. But if you place them outside that case environment, there's going to be a high probability you don't see the results you want.
I hear some of this transformational change that's needed today is actually a skill of the future because it's
Yes.
not going to stop. Like, I guess that's one thing I heard.
Yeah.
And the other aspect is sounds like, and you tell me if I heard this, is it more like you talked about the expert in case? Is it more
Hmm.
generalist type of skills, or how do I think about
Yeah.
that?
Uh, Generalist has different connotations based on the receiving audience, but I will offer the executives that bring that agility, that bring that action and results orientation, bring that strategic acumen, and bring that global awareness and cultural sensitivity. It's not 100%, but if you find an executive or you find a group of executives that have most of those boxes checked, that group will have a higher degree of success pivoting from one market or from one product than others. And it doesn't mean that somebody can't. It's really incumbent upon the organization if they are recruiting from the outside or internal promote, to not only talk about what they see, what they expect, but putting
Mhm.
guardrails around that time frame. If you
Got
give
it.
somebody enough time, if they bring all those skills and tools, they can directionally get there. But if you have a sense of urgency, or there is a moment in time where we have to get this commercial transformation right in terms of what's happening with semiconductors and electronic materials, we don't have the option of teaching somebody or having somebody learn on the job. We need
Got it.
that domain expertise combined with the acumen and the transformation skill.
Got it. Okay. A very qualified sense of generalist. I
A
get
very
that.
qualified sense of generalist. And again, there's been a number of companies that have successfully instituted these types of programs, these types of leadership archetypes over decades. But it's really, you want to have somebody with as diverse of a product, market, functional leadership tool belts as you can. And if that individual has proven to be successful in a host of different environments, again, past is prologue, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's a predictor of the future, but there's enough data points to put to put a confidence interval that this individual, once promoted or getting promoted a step above where they are, but those foundational elements are transferable.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Oh, that's fantastic. Um, before we see if we've got some other questions from the audience, Ron, where can folks reach you if they want to reach out to you? What's the best channel, the best avenue to get in touch with you?
Yeah, the best channel is either through LinkedIn, which has a direct link to JM Search's website, where you'll find my bio and the bio of all my great colleagues and the works that they do. Or if you just want to send me a direct message on LinkedIn, I try to get to them as quickly as possible, but I'll at least see it. And in the appropriate time, we'll respond, and then we'll convert over to more of corporate email and other forms where we can stay connected.
Fantastic. And we'll put your contact information in our show notes as well, so all our members will get access to it if they need to reach out to you. I want to thank you so much for spending the time with us. I saw as folks were for exiting for time here, because I know we had a few folks drop. A lot of great comments and a much appreciation for your insights and what you brought us today.
Well, thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity, and it's a topic that we will continue to be discussing. So I'm happy to have that conversation, additional conversations with people here, and obviously, Kendall, you and I have known each other a really long time, and I've always enjoyed our insights and information share. So thank you for having me.
It was the great conversation I knew it was going to be, Ron. I really enjoyed it.
It's a very timely question, and to rewind the tape with private equity, 20 25 years ago, financial engineering was a driver of deals, and it would lead to an almost immediate disbursement of capital to the GPs and the LPs. And over time, as the financial engineering has become commoditized and really doesn't drive much, if any, of the deal value, it gets to people and execution. And the biggest difference is in private equity, the sponsor has a finite window of ownership. And what we are seeing is that time frame of where the small cap, mid cap private equity firms that either buy a corporate carve out or they acquire a family owned business, it goes through the very similar playbook of we'll stand it up, we'll professionalize it, will add enough tools without having to overextend the balance sheet because, again, every fixed dollar that walks out the door is $1 less that the sponsor can monetize at exit. So there will be an investment in the people and the processes and the team, but it's going to be incredibly targeted. Now, what we're seeing today is there are many assets that were acquired in that post-COVID restocking supply chain opening period of 21 into early 22. And unfortunately, the demand forecasts, the market forecasts, the regulatory environment, macroeconomic environment, likely some combination of all of those, has either shifted or it doesn't hold as true as it did when the investment thesis was created. So now you're seeing private equity firms that are making leadership changes because, simply put, the skills and the tools that the CEO that was brought on when the family member stepped away, and this was the first external CEO, what that CEO brought to the table is unlikely going to be the skill and the market knowledge that will lead us to exit.
Absolutely.
I just saw an operating partner on LinkedIn who was unpacking. I don't know if Bain or one of the big guys did an M&A analysis, but his basic conclusion was the deals don't make sense unless the PE firm actually needs to run the company, right? The levers you had available to you in the past, they help, but they don't get you clear to your valuation exit point.
That is what we are seeing, and it just not to keep belaboring the point, but maybe to address it a different way. What prevents a large company executive from getting on the radar of a private equity firm?
Mm.
And it is just that it is not bringing or not having that sense of urgency, not having that action bias, not having that results driving, because you don't have the time and you're just not going to have the headcount and the bandwidth that you would have in a public company.
Thanks for that answer, Ron. I really appreciate your time and really great insights. I'm sure I'm going to get more feedback along the lines of what we got already. So, well, I appreciate everybody who could make it today. For those of you who are driving growth in your organizations, I want to take a few seconds to let you know about the resources we have available to you. These are all available at growth-arc.com. That's www.growth-arc.com. If you're not a member of the Executive Roundtable, I encourage you to register to be notified for all of our upcoming events. It's free and it's open to VP level and above. For regular tips and insights on growth, we offer a weekly newsletter for executives. It's usually a 2-minute read. It comes straight to your inbox. We give you one key insight per week and ways to immediately action it. And we cover both business growth as well as your career and leadership growth. And finally, our podcast features replays of our roundtables along with key seminars that Growth Arc offers from time to time. We just did one on executive influence. That's a hit, and you'll find that episode at the podcast link. Again, all of these are available at growth-arc.com. If you're an Executive Roundtable member and you're receiving the replay, you'll get a set of slides with the links that I'm showing here in them. Thank you for attending, and we will see you next time on the Executive Roundtable.